They say the worst truths come not as shouts but as whispers. For me, the truth unraveled in the most unexpected place, the sterile corridors of the company where I'd worked for over a decade. The office was always a sanctuary for me, an escape from the chaos of life. That all changed when I overheard my name in a hushed conversation in the break room. And Mark doesn't even suspect it, came the voice of Thomas Lane, my boss, the man I respected most in the company. I froze outside the door, coffee mug trembling in my hand. My wife's name followed, spoken with a smirk I could hear even through the wall. I told her he's too dull to notice, he continued, his voice laced with a kind of arrogance that made my stomach churn. But, hey, you can't blame her for wanting a little excitement, right? I didn't need to hear more. The world seemed to tilt as my mind scrambled to make sense of what I had just heard. My wife, Beth, and my boss. A bitter chill ran through me as I forced my feet to carry me back to my desk. I stared blankly at my computer screen, the once familiar hum of office life now suffocating. Was it true? Had Beth betrayed me? And if so, how long had this been going on, right under my nose? I thought of all the late nights she claimed to be at book club, and suddenly, they seemed anything but innocent. The worst part? I couldn't confront her just yet. I needed to be sure. And the answers, I realized with a sinking heart, lay not at home but right here at work. The rest of the day passed in a blur, every moment a struggle to maintain my composure. My co-workers noticed my silence, but I brushed off their concern, mumbling about deadlines. Inside, my thoughts raced. I couldn't act on suspicion alone. If Beth and Thomas were involved, I needed proof. That evening, I stayed late under the pretense of finishing a report. The office was eerily quiet, most of the staff long gone. My heart pounded as I approached Thomas's office, a small corner sanctuary with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that offered him a commanding view of the workspace. His door was locked, but I wasn't here for that. Instead, I checked his assistant's desk just outside. Jessica, always meticulous, left little to chance, but her inbox tray caught my eye. Amidst the stack of papers was a familiar name. It was a travel reimbursement form. Beth's name was listed as a personal guest for a conference in Chicago last month. My stomach twisted. She'd told me she was visiting her sister that weekend. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the document, careful not to disturb the pile. Then I returned to my desk, forcing myself to breathe evenly as I opened my email. If I wanted more, I'd have to risk digging into Thomas's correspondence. Luckily, as part of my role in IT support, I had access to the system under the guise of troubleshooting. It wasn't technically illegal, but it felt invasive. The first few searches yielded nothing, but then I stumbled upon a series of messages from Beth's email account, personal exchanges peppered with phrases like, "missing our time together," and, "next week at the office." My blood boiled as I scrolled through plans disguised as work discussions, their intimacy veiled by carefully chosen words. I closed the laptop, staring at the darkened screen as my reflection stared back. This wasn't just an affair, it was an open mockery of everything I thought we shared. Worse, it was happening in the very place where I had always taken pride in my integrity and hard work. The sound of the cleaning crew startled me. It was time to go home. But as I packed up, I realized something else. This wasn't just a betrayal between Beth and me, it was a challenge, one orchestrated by my boss, no less. And I wasn't about to lose. The following evening, the weight of what I'd uncovered bore down on me like a leaden cloud. I told myself I needed clarity, a plan, but instead, I found myself in the office break room, clutching an unopened bottle of whiskey I'd intended to take home as a gift from a company event. It wasn't mine to drink, but in that moment, it felt like the only salve for my frayed nerves. I poured myself a glass, the amber liquid catching the harsh fluorescent light, and let the burn of the first sip steady my shaking hands. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the vending machine. My mind wandered to the emails, the reimbursement form, the smug expression on Thomas's face as he joked about me. The anger surged again, raw and hot. I wasn't just a betrayed husband, I was a man humiliated on every front. The glass shook in my grip as I reached for the bottle again. But as I did, the door to the break room opened. Startled, I knocked the bottle off the counter. It shattered against the tile floor, the whiskey spilling out like a dark, bitter river, the sharp scent cutting through the air. "Mark," a voice called, hesitant but familiar. It was Jessica, Thomas's assistant. She froze in the doorway, her eyes darting between the shards of glass and my hollow expression. What are you doing here so late?" "I could ask you the same thing," I muttered, crouching to pick up a piece of glass before stopping myself. It wasn't worth the risk of cutting my hand. Instead, I grabbed a towel and began to mop up the mess. Jessica stepped closer, her movements cautious. "I forgot some notes for a meeting tomorrow. Are you okay?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. "Do I look okay?" I snapped, immediately regretting the harshness in my tone. She flinched but didn't retreat. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but," she hesitated, biting her lip. "If it's about Thomas, maybe you should talk to him." Her words were like a spark to dry kindling. "What do you mean? What do you know?" I stood abruptly, the towel forgotten. Jessica took a step back, her eyes wide. "Nothing. I mean, I've noticed things. He's been different. Distracted. And I've seen your wife's name pop up on his calendar a few times. I didn't mean to snoop, but—" "Thank you," I interrupted, my voice cold. That's all I needed to hear. She seemed unsure whether to stay or leave, but after a moment of awkward silence, she turned and walked out, leaving me alone with the mess of whiskey and glass. The break room felt suffocating, the weight of my fury and despair too heavy to bear. I cleaned up the remains of the bottle and dumped the shards in the trash. As I washed my hands at the sink, the cold water stinging my fingers, I made a decision. The time for silent suffering was over. It was time to confront the man who thought he could steal my life and laugh about it. I didn't sleep that night. After leaving the office, I drove aimlessly, my mind racing with what I'd uncovered and what Jessica had unwittingly confirmed. The bottle of whiskey might have broken, but it symbolized something deeper, a fracture in my life I couldn't ignore. By dawn, I had resolved to confront Thomas directly. When I arrived at the office, the usual buzz of the morning was already underway. Phones rang, the copier hummed, and small talk floated through the air. I moved through the chaos with a singular focus, ignoring the greetings of coworkers who barely registered in my periphery. Thomas's office door was open, and he sat at his desk, typing on his laptop. He looked up, surprised to see me standing in his doorway without knocking. "Mark," he said, leaning back in his chair with that same confident smirk that now felt like a dagger. "Early start, huh? What's on your mind?" I stepped in, closing the door behind me, and sat across from him. For a moment, I didn't speak. I just stared at him, studying the man who had not only betrayed my professional trust but, it seemed, had also waged war on my personal life. "Mark," he prompted, his smile faltering slightly. "Is it worth it?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. He frowned, clearly puzzled. "Is what worth it?" I leaned forward, resting my arms on his desk. "Throwing away your career, your reputation, for what? A cheap thrill with another man's wife?" The smirk disappeared entirely, replaced by a flicker of discomfort. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his tone defensive. "Don't insult me, Thomas," I snapped. "I heard you in the break room yesterday. And I've seen the emails. Beth's name on the travel forms, the calendar invites. You're not as clever as you think you are." For a moment, he said nothing, his eyes darting to the glass walls of his office as if gauging who might be watching. Then, he leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "Look, Mark," he began, his voice low. "I don't know what you think you've figured out, but you're making a mistake here. Be careful." "Careful?" I laughed bitterly. "You're the one who should be careful. You think you can take what's mine and just walk away? That you can humiliate me in my own workplace and I'll let it slide?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "You need to calm down. Whatever issues you and Beth have, leave me out of it. I've done nothing wrong." His blatant denial ignited a fury in me I hadn't known I was capable of. I stood abruptly, palms flat on his desk. "Nothing wrong?" I hissed. "You've been sneaking around with my wife, undermining my family, and you have the audacity to act like a victim? I should drag you out of this office by your collar and let everyone see who you really are." Thomas stood too, now visibly tense. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "You're angry, I get it. But don't let your emotions ruin your career here. You want to throw accusations around? Fine. But do it outside this office." I took a step back, fists clenched. "You're not worth it," I said through gritted teeth. "But don't think for a second that this is over." Before he could respond, I turned on my heel and left, slamming the door behind me. Every step back to my desk felt like fire coursing through my veins. Co-workers glanced at me, their curiosity thinly veiled, but I didn't care. Let them wonder. Let them talk. Back at my desk, I stared at my screen, knowing I couldn't keep working here, not with Thomas still in charge, and not with the knowledge of what he and Beth had done hanging over me. But I also knew I wouldn't leave quietly. If they thought I'd just roll over and let this happen, they had underestimated me. I opened a blank document and began typing. My resignation letter started with two simple words, effective immediately. As I wrote, my phone buzzed on the desk. Beth's name lit up the screen. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. I let it ring, the sound growing more grating with each passing second. When it stopped, I glanced at the voicemail icon. Curiosity got the better of me, and I hit play. "Mark," her voice began, shaky but pleading. "Please, let's talk. I can explain everything. You don't understand what's been going on. It's not what you think. I need to see you. Please call me back. I love you." Her words felt hollow, her tone rehearsed. I deleted the message and returned to the resignation letter. By the time I printed it, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about leaving, it was about making a statement. Thomas and Beth had already crossed the line. It was time for me to draw one of my own. With the resignation letter folded neatly in my hand, I walked toward HR, my every step fueled by determination. Co-workers whispered as I passed, their curiosity buzzing like static in the air. I didn't care. This was my line in the sand. When I reached the HR director's office, I knocked firmly. Ms. Elston, a sharp-eyed woman with an uncanny ability to read people, motioned me inside. "Mark," she greeted warmly. "What can I do for you?" I placed the letter on her desk, my jaw tight. "This is my resignation, effective immediately." Her brows furrowed as she glanced at the letter. "Effective immediately? Mark, this is sudden. Is something wrong?" I hesitated. How much should I reveal? After a moment, I spoke, choosing my words carefully. "I can't stay here anymore. It's become impossible to work under the current leadership." Ms. Elston's gaze sharpened, her eyes narrowing in understanding. "I see." She tapped her fingers on the desk. "You've been with us for over 10 years. Are you sure about this? If there's a problem with management, we can address it." "No," I said firmly. "This isn't fixable. I just need to move on." She nodded, though her expression betrayed lingering concern. "Very well. I'll process this immediately." I'm sorry to see you go, Mark. Thank you, I replied, standing. For everything. As I left her office, a weight lifted from my shoulders. But the relief was short-lived. I knew the hardest confrontation still lay ahead. Later that evening, I sat in my car outside our home, the engine idling. I'd ignored Beth's calls all day, but now there was no avoiding her. She'd know something was wrong, she always did. I turned off the car and stepped into the crisp evening air, steeling myself for what was to come. Inside, the house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the dishwasher. Beth sat on the couch, her phone in her hand, her expression shifting from nervous to relieved as she saw me. Mark, she began, standing. I've been calling you all day. Why didn't you answer? Don't, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Don't lie to me, Beth. Not again. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? I stepped closer, my voice low but sharp. Thomas. Your little meetings at work. The trip to Chicago. Don't play innocent. I know everything. Beth's mouth opened and closed, her words faltering. Mark, it's not what you think. Then explain it to me, I snapped. Explain how you could betray me, our family, everything we've built. Make me understand why I wasn't enough for you. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered. Thomas, he was just so attentive. He made me feel special, Mark. Like I wasn't just a mom or a wife, but a woman. Her words stung like a slap. And I didn't make you feel that way. Was the life we built together not enough? I didn't plan this, she said desperately. It just happened. No, Beth, I said coldly. It didn't just happen. You made a choice. And that choice destroyed us. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. Mark, please. We can fix this. I'll end it with Thomas. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. It's too late, I said, my voice breaking despite my resolve. You didn't just hurt me, you humiliated me. You put our family at risk, and for what? A man who doesn't care about you. Beth sobbed, collapsing onto the couch. I love you, Mark. I do. Please don't leave me. I stood there for a moment, watching the woman I once loved crumble under the weight of her guilt. But her tears couldn't undo the damage. I'm leaving tonight, I said finally. I'll figure out how to move forward, but I can't stay here. Not now. Her cries followed me as I walked out the door, the cold night air hitting me like a physical force. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or sadness, only emptiness. As I got into my car, I knew one thing for certain, this wasn't the end. The road ahead would be long, but I was ready to face it, even if it meant starting over from scratch. The next morning, I woke up in a motel room on the edge of town. The room smelled faintly of mildew, and the thin curtains did little to block out the harsh morning light. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the previous day pressing down on me. My phone sat on the nightstand, silent after a night of missed calls and voicemails from Beth. I hadn't bothered listening to them, I already knew what they'd say. I couldn't linger in this limbo. I needed a plan, not just for me but for the kids. As much as Beth's betrayal cut deep, it was our children who mattered most now. After a quick shower, I dressed and headed out to find breakfast and make some calls. At a nearby diner, I nursed a coffee while flipping through a list of divorce attorneys I'd found online. Each name carried the weight of a reality I still struggled to fully accept. One name stood out, Barbara Keene, a no-nonsense attorney known for her tenacity in cases like mine. I dialed her number and was relieved when she answered on the second ring. Keene Law Office, she said briskly. Hi, Ms. Keene. My name is Mark Johnson. I need a divorce attorney, and I've heard you're the best. Her tone softened slightly. I'm sorry to hear you're in this position, Mr. Johnson. Why don't you tell me a bit about your situation? I hesitated, then took a deep breath. My wife's been unfaithful. It's been going on for a while, and I have proof. We have 3 kids, and I want to protect them from all of this. She asked a few more questions, her professionalism unwavering, and by the time I hung up, I had an appointment set for later that week. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. After breakfast, I drove to my mother's house to see the kids. They ran to me as soon as I walked through the door, their joy a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt. Daddy! Emma, my youngest, threw her arms around my legs, her smile radiant. Hey, sweetheart, I said, scooping her up. Natalie and Ben followed close behind, peppering me with questions about when I was coming home and why Mom hadn't been around. I knelt to their level, forcing a smile. Things are a little complicated right now, but I promise everything's going to be okay. Grandma's going to take care of you for a little while longer. My mother watched from the doorway, her expression a mix of sympathy and worry. After the kids ran off to play, she pulled me aside. Have you spoken to Beth? I shook my head. Not directly. She's been calling, but I don't see the point. There's nothing to say that will change what's happened. She's been here, Mom admitted. She wanted to see the kids, but I told her it wasn't a good idea until things settled down. I sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on me again. Thanks for keeping them safe. I just need a little more time to figure everything out. Mom nodded, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. You're doing the right thing, Mark. Just don't let anger cloud your judgment. The kids need you to stay strong. That afternoon, I returned to the motel and began piecing together the evidence I had against Beth. Emails, voicemails, the reimbursement form, each one a reminder of her betrayal. I knew I couldn't let my emotions guide me, I had to be strategic if I wanted to protect my children and secure a future for us. The hardest part was facing the reality that I couldn't shield the kids from the truth forever. At some point, they'd realize why their parents weren't together anymore. I could only hope they'd understand. As night fell, I sat by the window, staring out at the dim glow of the motel's neon sign. The road ahead felt impossibly long, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of resolve. I'd lost my wife and my job, but I hadn't lost everything. I still had my children, and I still had a chance to rebuild my life. Tomorrow, I'd start putting my plans into motion. 2 days later, I sat across from Barbara Keene in her office, the hum of a nearby air conditioner the only sound as I recounted my story. Her sharp eyes never wavered, absorbing every detail with practiced calm. When I finished, she leaned back, folding her hands. Mark, you have a strong case. Infidelity is clear grounds for divorce in Mississippi, and your evidence, emails, reimbursement records, even voicemails, supports your claim. This will work in your favor, especially concerning custody. Her words were a relief, though they did little to ease the ache in my chest. What are my chances of getting custody of the kids? It's not guaranteed, she admitted. Beth's infidelity doesn't make her an unfit mother. But if you can prove your stability, emotionally, financially, we can argue for primary custody. At the very least, we'll secure shared custody. I nodded, the pieces of my new reality falling into place. What's next? I'll file the paperwork immediately, she said, her tone firm. Prepare yourself, though. This process can get messy, especially if Beth decides to fight it. I'll be ready, I replied, more determined than ever. As I left her office, a sense of clarity settled over me. I wasn't out of the woods yet, but for the first time, I felt like I had control over my life again. The first crack in the facade came the day after the paperwork was filed. Beth called me again, and for the first time in days, I picked up. Mark, she began, her voice trembling. I got the papers. How could you do this without even talking to me? I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Beth, I've spent weeks trying to make sense of this, but there's nothing left to say. You made your choice, and this is the consequence. Her tone turned pleading. I told you it was a mistake. I ended things with Thomas, he means nothing to me. Can't we just start over? You didn't just hurt me, I said, my voice firm but calm. You humiliated me. You endangered our family. And you made me doubt everything we built together. That's not something I can forgive. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of her uneven breathing. What about the kids? She whispered. They'll always be my priority, I said. And I'll fight for them. They deserve stability, something you and Thomas took away. She started crying, but I didn't have the energy to comfort her. Not anymore. I'm sorry, Beth, I said softly before ending the call. Days turned into weeks as the legal process unfolded. True to Barbara's warning, it was messy. Beth filed her response, claiming she was still a devoted mother and that her indiscretion shouldn't impact custody. Her lawyer painted her as a victim of marital neglect, citing my long work hours as a factor in her decision to seek attention elsewhere. The argument stung, but I refused to let it rattle me. I knew the truth, and more importantly, so did the evidence. Barbara assured me that we had a strong case, and I trusted her judgment. The tension between Beth and me spilled over into every interaction. The few times we exchanged the kids at my mother's house, she avoided eye contact, her expression a mix of regret and resentment. The children, blissfully unaware of the full extent of our struggles, clung to me during each handoff, asking when we'd all be together again. Their innocence made the situation even harder to bear. The final blow came one afternoon when I received an unexpected visitor at the motel. I opened the door to find Thomas standing there, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. What the hell are you doing here? I growled, my body tensing. He raised his hands in mock surrender. Relax, Mark. I'm not here to fight. I wanted to apologize. Apologize? I stepped forward, my fists clenched. You ruined my marriage, humiliated me at work, and you think an apology is enough? Thomas flinched but held his ground. Look, I messed up. I never should have crossed that line with Beth. It was stupid, reckless. I've lost a lot too, you know. The company's board found out about the affair. I'm being forced to resign. His words caught me off guard. Good, I said coldly. You deserve worse. I know, he said, his voice softening. I just wanted you to hear it from me. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I didn't respond, and after a long, tense silence, he turned and walked away. As I watched him leave, I felt no satisfaction, only emptiness. The court date arrived faster than I expected. Sitting in the courtroom, listening to lawyers dissect my life, was one of the most surreal experiences of my existence. Beth sat across from me, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody, with Beth receiving visitation rights. The decision felt like a victory, but it came at a steep cost. Our family was irreparably fractured, and no court ruling could change that. That evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of my new apartment, the weight of it all finally hit me. I'd won the battle, but the war had left scars I wasn't sure would ever heal. My phone buzzed, a message from my mother, a photo of the kids playing in her backyard. They were smiling, carefree and full of life. It was a reminder of what I was fighting for and a glimmer of hope that, somehow, we'd find a way forward. Thank you for watching to the end. Write in the comments what you liked and what you would like to see next.